On a freezing January night in 1945, a captain in the United States Army sat 12 yards from a warm officer's table and ate his supper beside a coal bin. He was not late. He was not under arrest. He was not enlisted personnel waiting for an assignment. He wore captain's bars on his collar, the same bars worn by men laughing behind the kitchen wall. But every night, while the battalion officers gathered under chandeliers rescued from a damaged French schoolhouse, Captain Nathaniel Price was handed a tin plate and sent through the service door, not because of his rank, not because of his conduct, because he was black. The order was never written down. That was the clever part. There was no memorandum for headquarters to find, no typed instruction with a signature at the bottom, no official rule anyone could challenge. Just a nod to the mess sergeant, a cleared corner by the coal chute, and one empty chair at the officer's table that everyone pretended not to see. For 17 nights, Captain Price ate alone in the scullery. And on the 18th night, the wrong man noticed the chair. Captain Nathaniel Price had learned early how much noise silence could make. He had grown up in Baltimore, trained through a colored ROTC program, and entered the Army with the kind of discipline that made other men stand straighter around him. By the winter of 1945, he had led supply convoys through shell, torn roads, moved ammunition under blackout orders, and brought stranded infantry platoons hot food, when the front line looked less like a line and more like a wound across the snow. His men trusted him because he did not waste words. When roads iced over, he found another route.
When drivers panicked under artillery in the distance, he put a hand on the hood of the first truck and walked the convoy forward until the men remembered how to breathe. He had earned his commission the hard way. But inside Billet 7, a requisitioned girls' school outside Segregated, France, none of that seemed to matter to Major Harold Kessler. Kessler was a staff officer with clean gloves, polished boots, and a talent for turning prejudice into procedure. He never shouted racial slurs in public. He did not need to. He called it mess harmony. He called it unit comfort. He called it keeping friction out of the room. What he meant was that a black captain could risk German artillery with the rest of them, but could not sit with them afterward. The building itself made the insult worse. The main dining room still carried traces of another life. Framed school certificates on the walls, a cracked portrait of a French headmistress, long tables covered with white cloth someone had found in a linen closet. Steam rose from dented serving pans. Lantern light softened the plaster scars left by nearby shell bursts. 23 feet away, behind a swinging door, the scullery had no cloth, no lantern shade, and no heat except what leaked through the pipes. Captain Price sat on an overturned flour barrel with his back near the coal bin, eating from a mess kit balanced on his knees. He never complained. That silence fooled the men who wanted him humiliated. They thought silence meant acceptance. They did not understand that Price was protecting his command. A formal protest from a black officer in 1945 could travel through the wrong hands and return as a career-ending stain. Troublemaker, agitator, unfit for cohesion. So Price did what he had done on bad roads and under bad orders. He kept his face still. He finished the work. He gave no weak man the satisfaction of seeing him bend. But not everyone mistook discipline for consent. Captain Elias Ward was a maintenance officer from Pennsylvania, a quiet man with oil under his fingernails, and a habit of reading regulations when other men played cards. He had watched Price come in through the side hall for more than 2 weeks. He had watched the mess sergeant lower his voice. He had watched one of the youngest lieutenants glance toward the empty chair, then look down at his plate because cowardice often begins as politeness. On the 18th night, Ward stepped into Kessler's office before supper and closed the door behind him. Major, Captain Price is being seated in the scullery again. Kessler did not look up from his paperwork. Captain Price has been accommodated. Ward stayed where he was. An officer's accommodation is the officer's mess. Kessler's pencil stopped. This is a field headquarters, not a debating society. No, sir. It is a battalion headquarters, which means rank still matters. Kessler raised his eyes, and in that look, Ward understood the whole design. The major had built a system just small enough to deny, and just cruel enough to work. Captain, Kessler said, you are confusing idealism with command. Ward answered carefully. I am confusing nothing, sir. A captain eating beside a coal bin while lieutenants sit at the table is not command. It is disorder wearing a uniform. The room went quiet. Outside, a truck rolled past the courtyard, with chains clanking over frozen mud. Kessler stood. That man eats where I tell him to eat. Then put it in writing. For the first time that evening, Kessler lost color. Say that again. Ward did not raise his voice. Put the order in writing, name him. State his rank, state the reason he is barred from the officer's table. I will carry it to division myself. That was the line, not the moral argument, not the appeal to fairness. The paper. Because men like Kessler survived by keeping their ugliest orders off the record. He stepped around the desk and pointed toward the hall. You will return to your duties, Captain. Ward looked at him for one long second. Then he turned, opened the door, and walked out. He did not go to supper. He went to the signal room. The duty operator saw his face and did not ask many questions. Ward requested the division provost marshal, then the chief of staff, then any line to corps headquarters that could carry a command complaint before the evening meal ended. The first officer on the wire tried to slow him down. Ward gave names, ranks, location, and the one detail nobody could soften. A United States Army captain was being forced to eat beside a coal bin while equal-rank officers dined 23 feet away. The message moved faster than Kessler expected. Because the Army could tolerate many ugly things in silence, but it had very little patience for a commander stupid enough to turn rank into a private caste system inside a combat zone. The general arrived just after the soup was served. No bugle, no warning call from the gate, only headlights crossing the tall windows and the growl of a Jeep engine dying in the courtyard. The officers in the dining room went still before the door even opened. Then General Thomas Harrow stepped inside wearing a mud-streaked greatcoat, leather gloves, and the expression of a man who had already decided the first 3 questions were traps. Every officer stood, chairs scraped, forks stopped halfway to mouths. Harrow did not return a salute. He looked at the tables. He looked at the unused chair beside Captain Ward. Then he looked at Major Kessler. Major, General. How many captains are assigned to this billet? Kessler's jaw tightened. 4, sir. Harrow counted the room with his eyes. I see 3. No one moved. The room had become so quiet that the pipes could be heard knocking in the wall. Where is the 4th? Kessler swallowed. Captain Price prefers to take his meal separately. Harrow turned his head slightly. Prefers? Yes, sir. The general removed one glove, finger by finger. Major, I have spent the day reading reports from units that are short of fuel, short of blankets, short of bridge timber, and short of men. I have not yet read a report from any unit short of chairs. A few faces lowered at the table. Kessler tried again. It was judged best for harmony, sir. Harrow stepped closer. Harmony is when a unit functions, What you have described is concealment. Then he looked toward the kitchen door. Show me. Kessler did not move quickly enough. Harrow walked past him. The swinging door opened with a dull wooden slap. Captain Price was standing now, not scrambling, not hiding his plate. Standing, his mess kit rested on the flour barrel. Coal dust marked one sleeve of his field jacket. His boots were still stained white at the edges from frozen road salt. He saluted. Sir. Harrow returned the salute, not casually. Fully every officer crowded behind the kitchen door saw it. That was the first correction before the speech, before the punishment, before the chair. A general returned the salute of the man the room had tried to make invisible. Harrow looked at the flour barrel, then the coal bin, then the tin plate. Captain Price, were you ordered to eat here? Price held the general's gaze. Sir, I was directed here by the mess sergeant. On whose authority? Price did not look past him toward Kessler. I was not shown a written order, sir. That answer landed harder than an accusation, because it left the guilt exactly where it belonged. Harrow turned back to the doorway. Major Kessler. The major stepped into the scullery, face tight, hands stiff at his sides. Harrow's voice dropped. It was not loud, that made it worse. You have confused prejudice with command authority. You have taken a captain's commission and treated it as decoration when it suited you, then ignored it when it offended you. You have asked this officer to carry army responsibility in the field and private humiliation in the mess. The general pointed toward the dining room. That table does not belong to your comfort. It belongs to the ranks seated around it. Kessler said nothing. Harrow continued. You believe the absence of paper would protect you. It will not. You believed silence meant consent. It does not. And you believed the men in that room would forget what they saw as long as supper stayed warm. He paused just long enough for the officers behind him to feel named. They will not. Then Harrow gave the order that broke the room. Captain Price will sit at the head table tonight. Not at the end, not near the door. At the head. Kessler's eyes flicked up. Harrow saw it. And you, Major, will surrender your place. Two privates carried the chair from Kessler's usual seat and set it at the head of the table. No one spoke. The chair legs scraped across the wooden floor so loudly it seemed to tear through every excuse in the building. Captain Price stepped into the dining room. The officers watched him with the stunned embarrassment of men seeing their own cowardice arranged under lamplight. He did not look victorious. He did not look grateful. He looked like a tired officer walking to a place that should never have been denied him. Harrow waited until Price reached the chair. Then the general did something nobody expected. He remained standing. Sit, Captain. Price sat. Only then did Harrow pull another chair from the wall and place it beside him. Not across the room, not at the center as a spectacle. Beside him, the general sat, unfolded his napkin, and looked down the table. Gentlemen, you may continue eating when you remember how officers conduct themselves. For several seconds, nobody touched a fork. Then Captain Ward sat first. A lieutenant followed, then another. Kessler remained standing until Harrow looked at him. Major, you will eat in the scullery tonight. The major's mouth opened. No sound came. Harrow nodded toward the kitchen. You considered it adequate. That was the second correction. Not rage, not theater, consequence. Major Kessler walked through the swinging door and disappeared into the cold room by the coal bin. The meal resumed in pieces, a spoon against a bowl, a chair shifting, a man clearing his throat and finding no words worth saying. Captain Price ate slowly, one hand steady on the table, his face unreadable. The empty chair was no longer empty. And that was the thing the room could not recover from. Because once the hidden arrangement had been made visible, it could never again pretend to be normal. By morning, Billet 7 had changed, in the small ways that prove a larger fear has been broken. The mess sergeant stood straighter when Captain Price entered. The youngest lieutenant stopped using the side door as an excuse not to see him. Captain Ward found a field order on his desk, assigning Captain Price to lead the next supply movement through the snowed in road near Fallsburg, and every driver in that convoy knew exactly who had the authority. Kessler did not remain in command. The official language was careful, as official language often is, relieved pending review, failure of judgment, conduct prejudicial to discipline. But soldiers are better translators than clerks. They knew what it meant. A major had tried to build a private little army inside the army, and a chair had exposed him. Captain Price never made a speech about that night. He did not need to. Men who had ignored him had been forced to watch the machinery of rank turn in his direction. Not as charity, not as sentiment, as recognition that mattered. Because dignity in uniform is not a decoration handed down by decent men when the mood suits them. It is supposed to be built into the commission, into the salute, into the chair at the table. The war moved on. The roads thawed, froze again, and broke under the weight of trucks. The battalion crossed more ruined towns. Men who had laughed too loudly in the dining room learned to say, "Captain Price," with the correct weight in their mouths. And Price kept doing what he had done before anyone defended him. He led. Years later, men from that battalion would remember shell bursts, frozen tires, bad coffee, and the terrible math of winter war. But a few remembered something quieter. A black captain walking out of a coal-stained scullery. A general standing still until the room understood. A major being sent to the very place he had called adequate. And a chair dragged across floorboards, making more noise than any speech could have made. The chair had not made Nathaniel Price an officer. It forced the room to admit that he already was.